Hello, welcome to this biology moment where we'll take a brief look at valence electrons. Before we get started, we need to make sure you understand some terms. An element is an individual atom like hydrogen and carbon. Each element characteristically has a certain number of protons, which is the atomic number, which you can find on the periodic table. In the lower image, you're able to see a portion of the periodic table. The top number is the mass number, and the bottom number is the atomic number. Since an atom is neutral in its electrical charge, there's an equal number of protons and electrons. Electrons are distributed around the nucleus in specific regions called orbitals. Those orbitals are then grouped into different levels called electron shells. Each orbital can hold 2 electrons. There are certain guidelines we can follow when determining how the electrons are arranged. The first is that each electron shell contains a specific number of orbitals. The first shell contains 1 orbital, and the subsequent shells have 4. Second, the electrons fill up the innermost orbitals, and shells first, then move outwards. The outer shell that contains unpaired electrons is called the valence shell. The unpaired electrons are called valence electrons. The thing to remember about the valence shell that will become very important when we start to discuss molecules and chemical bonding is that elements are the most stable when their valence shell is full. In order for that valence shell to get full, electrons have to bond and share electrons. More on this later. Let's take a look at how to calculate the number of valence electrons a particular element has. The atomic number of silicon is 14, so there are 14 protons and 14 electrons. We know the first shell contains 2 electrons. I've already added the first electron in the first shell. Now I've added the second electron. Our electron count is at 2. We have 12 more electrons to place. Now that first shell is full. We move on to the second shell. We add the first electron. As we add electrons, we add 1 to each of the 4 orbitals before we add another electron to that orbital. Right now our electron count is 4. We add an electron to the third orbital in the second shell. And we add an electron to the fourth orbital of the second shell. Our electron count is now 5. Now that we have 1 electron in each of the 4 orbitals, we now proceed to add a second electron to each orbital. All 4 orbitals have 2 electrons and the second shell is full. Our electron count is now at 10. We have 4 more electrons to place, and so we move to the third shell and add an electron to each of the 4 orbitals. 1, 2, 3, 4. Our electron count is now at 14, and we are left with 4 unpaired electrons in the outer shell. Silicon has 4 valence electrons. Now it's your turn. How many valence electrons does oxygen have? When you think you have the answer figured out, click the Check Your Answer button. Oxygen has 2 unpaired electrons in its outer shell and therefore has 2 valence electrons. If you have any more questions or need further assistance, contact your instructor via the course email.